Back on the Chattahoochee today, on the Phoenix City side, Columbus being what we're looking at across the way here. And this is in the summer now, and yeah, notice how low it is compared to some of the earlier videos I've shot from this area of the world. This is an area that is heavily influenced by the dams upstream of it, and right now they're not generating anything. This is a very different place when the dams are not generating power. Now when you're in a tailwater situation, which is what this essentially is, you have two kinds of fluctuations in water levels and current. You have, of course, the one that's common to all rivers, and that is seasonal. So, your precipitation patterns, of course, dictate your flow patterns. So here in the southeast, your flows are highest in the winter and the spring, and lowest in the summer and fall. Really, especially in the fall. That's our driest time period. And so that's true of these tailwaters as well. But of course, you also have your daily fluctuations because of the dams upstream. And that's a little more complicated. The flows generated by dams are affected by multiple things. A lot of them have nothing to do with the local situation, if you will. So the dams are turned on and off for a very definitive purpose. These reservoirs and dams are there to control flooding and also to generate power. So the flooding part really is again tied to the precipitation that you're having. A lot of these reservoirs in this particular area have almost no storage. In other words, they don't draw them down and allow them to fill up over time. They're usually at full pool almost all time, so that means they can't really store the water. So when water comes down the river, they just generate it past. So if you have a wet year, like we've had so far this year, you see a lot of flow. And a lot of times it could be all day long. But if they have a choice, they're going to generate more in the afternoon than they're going to in the morning. And not very often at night either. Very commonly, the dams will be generating in the later half of the afternoon and early evening. And so why is that? Well, these are hydropower dams. When they generate, they're also creating electricity. And unlike what a lot of people think of when they think of hydropower, I mean, you just think, oh, they're producing a lot of power. Well, hydropower in very few areas it contribute more than 10% of the overall power to the grid. And that's certainly the case here. Only when you get out west to certain situations, the Columbia River is the most applicable example where a lot of the power out there is generated. The Columbia River has one of the highest volumes of water in North America coming out of it. So it powers a ton of power out of it. The Tennessee River is another one that generates a lot of power. TVA makes a lot of power that way, although it's still supplemented with coal and nuclear. But down here, most of our power here is generated with steam plants. Again, either nuclear or coal. Hydropower is probably about 5% of the grid at the most. So the power companies generate it in the afternoon for one very simple reason. They get the most money for the power generated then. Why? Because that is peak power demand. That is when the temperatures are their highest, and you have all the businesses and the homes and their ACs are running, and there's a great demand on the grid, and they can sell that power for the most price. So if you ever wondered why it always seems like that the dams are generating in the afternoon and not in the morning, it's not your imagination. There's a reason for that, and that's what it is. Of course, flows influence where fish are located, and in rivers, fish always are adapted to flows anyway. But when you talk about being below hydropower dams, these fish not only have to deal with seasonal variations in flow, they have to deal with daily fluctuations in flow and water levels. And for the most part, they do just fine that way. It can cause problems with reproduction depending on the fish, but the fish that are here, they adapt quite easily. Our research on the Chattahoochee River in Alabama, where fluctuations are really high, like 6-7 feet when they turn the dams on, we had radio tags in red-eye bass, and we also had them in Alabama bass, and they both coped in different ways. The red-eye bass just kind of hunkered behind a rock and just waited it out. But the Alabama bass, as soon as the water started going up, they went right to the bank and spent the whole time running up and down the banks, presumably feeding on the minnows and all that were being forced to the bank as well from the flows. And then once the flows stopped and the water started going down, they moved back out into the main river. So fish definitely respond to flows. They're found in different places within the river depending on what the flow is like. And I'm sure if you fish rivers for any amount of time, and if you're familiar specifically with particular stretches of river, there are places that you will fish when the water's up that you would never fish when the water's down. Some of those places might be dry when the river's down. And there are places that you would fish when it's low that you would never fish in when the water is high. But fish do move. They move rapidly. Those Alabama bass would move to the bank in a matter of minutes once that water started rising. And they would vacate that shoreline just as quickly as the water started dropping. So they do move, and it can be rapid and it can be dramatic. So when you're out here fishing on rivers, always consider the flow. Consider the flow, what we call the flow regime. Higher in the spring, less high in the summer, lowest in the fall in this part of the country because those are our driest months. And then you have the daily flow regime of, are they generating or not? Is the water still rising? Has the water reached its peak yet? And is the water starting to recede? Those are all things you have to think about when you're fishing places like this.